Is it just me, or does it seem like Jesus Christ is on his way? Is it just me, or could it be that it could happen any day?
Well, welcome. Good day to you, whatever time of day you are watching this. Last Sunday, we had a concert, so we did not do a regular video. We didn't record the concert, per the request of the folks doing the concert. And so I had planned on starting in 2 Chronicles, picking up where we left off in 2 Chronicles chapter 10 tomorrow. And this morning I was going to do a thing on New Year's resolutions. My wife did a bulletin board with a bunch of godly resolutions that a person could have. And then I realized, no, I probably ought to do that next Sunday morning. So you'll see that next week on the next video. And so for this week, so you have a video, I was looking at what I might do. My wife has a ladies' Bible study. It's called Ladies Book Club, where they read through the Bible, a book of the Bible, or a chapter of the Bible, or a portion of the Bible, and they discuss it. And they do that the second Sunday of every month. And so I do a men's Bible study while she has the ladies. And I've been doing David's Mighty Men, and I have to say this is one of my favorite portions of Scripture. Since I first encountered it, first came to understand about David's mighty men and what that was all about, I've been fascinated, first as a young man and then as a teenager and then growing up. And every time I read about David's mighty men, I pick up a little bit more. You realize that David's mighty men came into his life when he was on the run. Saul was seeking after David's life. David had been already anointed king, but Saul did not want to abdicate, and he was on the run. And along the way, these men saw something in David, some quality of leadership, something about him. They decided to ally themselves with him. And as you read about the mighty men and what they've done, it kind of leads you to, here in America, Navy SEALs or Special Forces. These men were really something else in their abilities and their talents. And you wonder, I've heard some sermons preached, and I have to wonder that maybe these men maybe didn't fit in anywhere else. Yet in David, they saw leadership, and through David's leadership, if they had any relationship with God at all, it's because of what they saw in David. And we know David was a man after God's own heart. And so these men that have allied themselves to David are the best of the best. And as we read through, I'll go through, it's in 2 Samuel chapter 23, and David it's his last words. It's what he's dying, and he knows he is, and these are some of the last things he said. And so we start in verse 8, where he said, "These be the names of the mighty men whom David had. The Tachmonite that sat in the seat, chief among the captains, the same was Adino the Eznite. He lift up his spear against 800, whom he slew at one time." So in a battle, he himself was responsible for 800 casualties on the enemy side. That's a pretty big count. Recently, we talked with the kids about Silent Night and the Christmas armistice in 1914 in World War I. How World War I marked such a change from men on horseback and fighting with revolvers and single-shot rifles to machine guns and tanks and aircraft and all the horrors of war that mechanization brings. But it would be hard-pressed to say that someone with a machine gun or a tank or an aircraft had taken out 800 people at one time. This was a very, very skilled individual in the art of war. And it says, after him was Eleazar, the son of Dodo the Ahoahite, one of the three mighty men with David, when they defied the Philistines that were there gathered together to battle. And the men of Israel were gone away. He arose and smote the Philistines until his hand was weary, and his hand clave unto the sword. And the Lord wrought a great victory that day, and the people returned after him only to spoil. I tell people, if you make a fist and hold it as hard as you can for a minute, and then try to release it as slowly as possible. I have had issues with carpal tunnel, sometimes using a hammer and the cramps and my hands locks up, to realize that he fought, his arm was locked up. They had to pry the weapon out of his hands, but he wrought such a victory that everyone else, when they realized what was happening, they came back. The battle was already over. He had won the battle. And then there's another, Shammah, the son of Agi the Hararite. And the Philistines were gathered together into a troop where was a piece of ground full of lentils. And the people fled from the Philistines. But he stood in the midst of the ground and defended it and slew the Philistines. And the Lord wrought a great victory. Today we have the term, not worth a hill of beans. That's what Shammah was fighting on, a hill of beans, and stood alone. And I've mentioned before that there's two classifications of fighters. There's the warrior, the one that stands alone and is skilled in single combat and in battle. And however many people you array against the warrior, he emerges victorious. He's trained his mind to understand that's him against however many. Then you have the soldier. The soldier goes through training and learns to work together. They learn to obey orders without question. They learn that together they are more powerful than individuals. Here in America, we've developed the concept of warfighter. That is a warrior that learns to fight with other soldiers. And that is what's called a force multiplier, that one person alone, through training, through skills, or a small group of men can take on forces much larger than themselves. And we certainly have had stories from Afghanistan, Iraq, Vietnam, Korea, all the way back, of men fighting together and against overwhelming odds and overcoming those overwhelming odds. And we're given a picture of that in verse 13. Verse 13 says, 3 of the 30 chief went down and came to David in the harvest time under the cave of Adullam, and the troop of the Philistines pitched in the valley of Rephaim. And David was then in a hold, and the garrison of the Philistines was then in Bethlehem. So the occupying troops were garrisoned there in Bethlehem. And David longed and said, "Oh, that one would give me drink of the water of the well of Bethlehem, which is by the gate." As a shepherd in Bethlehem, he was used to coming in from the field, being out in the heat of the day, and taking a drink from the well down underground, pulling the water up. It would have been cool, probably very clear and pure water was there. And David is in a cave. They are hiding from Saul. They're also hiding from the Philistines. Every hand is against him, it seems. And he's standing there in the mouth of the cave, and he looks out, and he's just reminiscing. He's, man, wouldn't I love to have a drink of water from that well? Wouldn't that be wonderful? And in my mind's eye, I picture these 3 chief mighty men as they stand behind their leader, their commitment, their dedication to David, as they stand behind him. And they hear David say this, man, what wouldn't I give for a drink of water from the well there in Bethlehem? And I see these men as they look to each other, and they decide they're going to make David's wish come true. And so they quietly withdraw from David. And the next thing you hear, David goes back into the cave and goes about his business, but he hears a noise. It's the noise of his people, his troops, his soldiers reacting to what's happening out in front of them. And here come these 3 mighty men, Adino, Eleazar, and Shammah, as they calmly walk down to the well. And the Philistine garrison sees them coming. And the commander of the garrison says, send 3 men out to dispatch these dogs and to kill these Jews and to destroy them. And so they send 3 men out. And they are quickly struck down by David's mighty men. And so they send more and more. And these 3 mighty men fighting side by side, shoulder to shoulder, fight their way through the Philistine garrison. And they come to the well, and 2 of them stand back to back as they defend the third, as he lowers the bucket into the well, pulls the bucket up, cuts the rope, and they fight their way back to David. That is a psychological warfare victory, if nothing else. It doesn't matter how many men you send against them, you will not prevail. These are strong and powerful men. They're motivated. They have a leader that they love and will give their lives for. And so they come back with a bucket of water. Verse 16, and the three mighty men break through the host of the Philistines and drew water out of the well of Bethlehem that was by the gate, and took it and brought it to David. Nevertheless, he would not drink thereof, but poured it out unto the Lord. And he said, Be it far from me, O Lord, that I should do this. Is not this the blood of the men that went in jeopardy of their lives? Therefore he would not drink it. These things did these three mighty men. Now, can you imagine from their perspective? They go and they fight, and it's been hard. Maybe they have some wounds. They certainly are tired and sweaty, and they come back with this bucket of water that they have gone and fought for David, and they give it to David, and David says, I can't drink this, and he dumps it out and says, God, this is an offering. God, it's sort of like, I think it was George Patton that said, don't grieve that such men have died, but thank God that such men have lived. And David, and then again, you can picture these three mighty men. If they're soldiers like soldiers have been through the ages, they probably looked at each other and said, we won't do that again. We won't do that again. And yet their loyalty to David, their desire to please their leader. That brings us down to verse 18. And that's what we're going to be teaching Sunday morning when this video goes live to the men. The next person, it says, and Abishai, the brother of Joab, the son of Zeruiah, was chief among thee, and he lifted up his spear against 300 and slew them, and had the name among three. Was he not most honorable of three? Therefore he was their captain, howbeit he attained not unto the first three. You will see as we go through David's mighty men, they're grouped in groups of three. And so the top group, the special forces, the best of the best, would be Adino, Eleazar, and Shammah. But then we're introduced to Abishai. And Abishai is the leader of the next three. He's number 4 in the leadership role. Now, he killed 300 in one battle, which again, by any standard, is incredible. Yet he wasn't quite as well known as Adino. He wasn't quite as powerful as Adino. Adino killed 800 in one battle. 300's pretty good, but 800? Eleazar won a great battle alone. It doesn't say that about Abishai. Shammah defeated the Philistines single-handed over a hill of beans. Abishai didn't quite do that. He wasn't at that level. He did not attain unto the first three. Now, there's a term that we've heard before, you've probably heard, talking about a big fish in a small pond, but that's not what this was all about. It wasn't that Abishai was the big fish in a small pond. No, he was part of that troop, of that group of David's mighty men. He just wasn't as notable as the others. And he certainly wasn't seeking notoriety. I don't think any of them were. Most men in a situation like this would not want to take credit. And David is here recounting their deeds, but we don't have other accounts of it. If we get jealous of what other people do, if we seek what others do, well, 300's pretty good. Yeah, but it's not 800. We get jealous of what other people do. Remember, with great power comes great accountability. And so we might not want that position of leadership. And God understands that. He built us that way. And so he allows us to rise up to the level that we can handle what he's designed for us and built into us. God understands the level we're able to rise to. He's set our bounds and knows our limits. He won't call us to do anything he hasn't already prepared us for. Not everybody can be president. Not everybody can be the leader. But everybody is called to serve. And our best may not be as good as somebody else's best, but we're not called to do somebody else's best. We're called to do our best. When we get back into 2 Corinthians chapter 10, it talks about not judging yourself by others. It's not wise to do that. We may not be number one in whatever situation, job, church, whatever we find ourselves in, but whatever position God gives us, we have an obligation to do our best. Abishai, His best was killing 300, which is a pretty good best when you stop and think about it. We're all called to do our best. It says that Abishai had the name among the three. Our reputation is based on what we have done, not what we plan to do. Abishai was known for 300. Again, a big accomplishment. He might have had plans to kill 1,000, but that doesn't matter. What matters is what we've done, not what we say we will do. Wednesday nights, Matt Little's here. Mike Grant's with him. Mike Grant's teaching us on missions. Mike Grant has experience in missions. And so when he tells us a mission story, he's speaking from experience. And as we listen to his story, it helps us to accept him as a teacher because he's been there and he's done that. And wherever we find ourselves, we are teachers as well. The folks that are under our influence are there for a reason. They look up to us, and it's important that we live up to the best of our ability to their expectations for us or of us. We hear from time to time of some pastor, some ministry leader that's gone astray, and it breaks our hearts to hear it, but it doesn't really surprise us because we're human. And we understand our feet are clay. And we understand that we are only what we are by the grace of God. And if we decide we want to take the wheel, instead of Jesus, we take the wheel, we understand what a mess we can quickly make of things. There's a song out there, Dad, I want to be just like you. And the father hears his son. He watches his son as he walks in his footsteps and does what Dad does. And it's a Christian song. And it says, Daddy, I want to be just like you. And the father says, God, I want to be just like you. Because if the boy wants to be like me, I want to be like God. That he could be more closely in a relationship with God. And I'm the intermediary here. I need to be closer to God. There's another song, a secular song, about a man stops his truck suddenly, and the kid spills his whatever Happy Meal, and the kid curses. And the father said, where'd you learn to talk like that? Well, from you, Dad. Oh my goodness, the responsibility we had. Abishai wasn't over everybody, but he did have people under him. And whoever I'm speaking to today, you probably have people under you, whether it's kids or whether it's at a job. There are folks that follow you. And you have an obligation to lead them to Christ by your example and by your life. Understand our children will walk in our footsteps. And so we need to be careful where we walk. So will those that follow us. They will walk in our footsteps. So we need to be careful where those footsteps are left. It says that Abishai was the most honorable of the three. Most often we fall into leadership. We don't seek it. Someone was saying the other day, we're talking about a contract to plow. And you contract for $1 amount to keep the yards clean. And if you have to do more plowing, it cuts into your profit. If you have to do less, you make more profit. And someone was saying, where else can you get a job where the less work you do, the more money you make? And I thought, well, Congress. Basically, you can get elected to a job and make a lot of money. But that's not how leadership works. We often fall into leadership. And the reason we fall into it is because God has set it in front of us. And so if you're a parent, you become a parent. Or if you're at a job and you get promoted, you are put in a place of leadership that you didn't seek. God puts men in leadership in the church, in the home, and in our communities. Now, as the leader of InterChurch, we have a lot of churches that don't have men in leadership. And it's not because the ladies are seeking power. It's because they don't have men that would be there and available for leadership. And that's a sad state of affairs. God called men to lead. In the church, in the home, and society, God called us to lead. In fact, in the Old Testament, in Isaiah, it says that when God was judging the people of Israel, he gave them women and children for leadership. Now, don't think that I'm saying a woman can't be a leader. There have been some very good women in leadership, but what I'm saying is God's plan is that a man should be in leadership. I didn't write the Bible. I didn't design it or organize it that way, but that's what the Bible says. The men are supposed to lead. And if the men are good leaders, the people will follow. And so here's the next question I have as I think about Abishai. The question I have is, are we doing the part that God has selected us to play, to do, to accomplish? Are we being faithful to God's calling on our lives? The Bible talks about being faithful over a few things and being made ruler over many. One of the reasons why some people don't have a place in leadership is because they don't want it. They won't be faithful in it. They'll do anything they can to prevent becoming a leader. That's not their desire. And while that's commendable on some level, that you're not seeking honor, you're not seeking power, not seeking glory, on the other hand, we need leaders. I think about a lot of small churches here in Maine. I got a lot of churches where we're filling pulpits that have 10 people or fewer. Got a lot of churches in Maine that are 20 or 30 people. We do have some big churches in Maine. The biggest church in Maine, I think, is slightly over 1,000 people. But you realize that now, or maybe it's a lot more than that, but anyhow, that's rare in Maine. Most of our churches are not over 100. Does that mean that the pastor of a church that only has 7 people is any less called, is any less equipped, is any less responsible before God than the pastor of thousands? Not at all. Does it mean the people should look at that pastor and say, well, if he was any good, he would be before a lot more people? Again, 2 Corinthians chapter 10, when we get into it, Paul talks about the fact that they looked down on him for his ability to present. He didn't use the Greek orator styles. He didn't do the presentation that others might have done that would follow classic training where they would stand and pose in a certain way and utter. He didn't do that. He just spoke the truth. Jack Hyland just passed away. He was a pastor, New Hope Bible Church in Dexter, Maine, or New Beginnings Bible Church in Dexter, Maine. He passed away. And talking with one of his church members, they said what we loved about him is he just spoke from the pulpit like he was talking to you, just where you were. He just spoke to you. He wasn't a great orator. And I know Jack. He loved the Lord. He studied a lot. My goodness, the books that we have that we're going to be distributing. But to understand, every person is different and their calling is different. In Florida, Harold Warner was pastor of First Baptist Church of Citrus Park. Ran about 600 people, good-sized church. I spoke there a number of times. Dr. Warner, at age 72, would write his sermons out on a yellow pad. Write them word for word. And then on Sunday morning, he would present them word for word. But as he presented, you would never know it. He preached. And he preached with enthusiasm and vigor. He was a great preacher. That's why they had about 600 people coming there every Sunday. In that same church was Gene Priddy. Gene Priddy was the head of Bible Basics International, now Missio Serve. And Gene would get up and picture this, Sunday morning in Florida, so it's hot in the summertime, so they drop the auditorium down into the 60s with the air conditioning, because by the time you get done with the morning service, it's in the mid to high 70s. When you fill the place up, it heats up pretty quick. And so it's cold, and you come in, and it's just a small group in this big auditorium for Sunday school, like so many other churches. And Gene would get up. He wasn't dynamic. He didn't do a lot of flourishes. He was a good speaker, but he wasn't dynamic. He wasn't a pulpiteer. And yet, every time he got up to teach, and he taught doctrine, hard doctrine, every time he got up to teach, I got something out of the message because it was filled with the Holy Spirit. And it was presented by the authority that God had given him from his study and prayer time. And every Sunday when I came and spoke in that church, I would come for Sunday school and listen to Gene's teaching. And I always came. I didn't have to. I could just come for the morning service. But I came to hear him teach. And what a teacher he was. We have a lot of pastors very faithful in a lot of our communities. And the churches aren't able to pay them. They have to work a second job or Social Security or whatever. It's not a glamorous position that they hold. Nobody's going to put them on television. Nobody's going to have them interviewed nationally. They're unknown except to God and their local people. Abishai had a name and recognition, but not as much as the others. Yet he was faithful to fulfill his part, and he was recognized by David. You and I might not be known outside our local circle of friends and our local family and group of folks that are close to us. People might not know our name. They might not be familiar with our ministry. They don't know our struggles. They don't know any suffering we might have in our lives. They just know what they see in us and what they see of us. And what they should see in us, if we're Christians and believers, should be Jesus Christ. Here in the Old Testament, Jesus was to come. Yet David loved God and was loved by God because he was a man after God's own heart. David failed miserably, but he attracted these men to him that would not accept leadership from anyone else. And among his leaders, those looking up to him, he developed leaders among groups of three in the organization of the military. Every military needs to be organized to be effective. And among that organization, there were men that might not be as accomplished as the top, but they were accomplished because God had called them to that position. And so what I would challenge you to do, whatever position God has given you, whether it is as a pastor or whether it is as a church member or a Sunday school teacher or a janitor, whatever God's called you to do in work and in your family, be the best leader you can be and recognize that God knows your abilities and your talents. One of the reasons I stopped playing basketball in high school is because I couldn't dunk the ball. Best I could do, I could get my fingers over the rim, but I couldn't dunk the ball, and I knew I will never play in the NBA if I can't get that kind of height, because when you play against people that are that tall and able to do that, my friend Art Cotton was at the Bangor YMCA, and they were doing a pickup game of basketball. And we had a semi-pro team here in Bangor called the Lumberjacks. And Art drove in to do a layup, and this hand comes over the top, and as he put the ball up, it just took the ball out of his hand and went down to the other side of the court and scored. And the fella came up to Art afterwards and said, when you're that close, you dunk the ball. And you realize, well, I'm never going to be that tall. I played soccer and I was pretty good at it, but I understood I'll never be the best at basketball. Yet I had a place and a position in junior high and high school. I had a part that I could play. But I did give up after a bit because I realized that's never going to be, and I wanted to focus on other things that I was good at. And sometimes we have to forsake some dreams and some goals that we have, understanding that's not in God's plan. We have to seek what God has for us, which is best, not what we want, which is not second best. What we want is worst. And so I pray you have a wonderful 2023. I pray that whatever God puts your hand to, you might find yourself cleaving so hard you can't let go, and I understand that. But whatever God gives you to do your best. Do your best. Because one day we all hope to hear, well done, thou good and faithful servant. Lord bless.
Hello, this is Jeff Tenney, pastor of Faith Bible Church of Oleman. Thanks so much for worshiping with us today. We trust it was a blessing and that you might find encouragement for the coming week in our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. If you're ever in the Greenbush area, we'd love to meet you in person. Our services start on Sunday mornings at 9:45 for Sunday school, 11 a.m. for the morning worship service, 6 p.m. for the evening service, and on Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m. we gather for Bible study and prayer. May God richly bless you and your family as you seek to serve Him wherever you are this week.
When I'm around, heaven is listening to my song.